Many people think that the prequels should have started with Attack of the Clones, or that Revenge of the Sith should have been 2 movies, but today I'm here to show you why both of these solutions are wrong. In my opinion, the Phantom Menace should stay, and there should be a new 4th film during the Clone Wars in between 2 and 3. I'll also look at why George Lucas structured the movies the way that he did. So why is the Phantom Menace necessary? Many people believe that removing the Phantom Menace and starting with Attack of the Clones is the key to fixing all of the prequel trilogy's problems, but this is far from the truth. Some argue that seeing Anakin as a kid is completely unnecessary, and that there is no reason we couldn't have started him as a Jedi Padawan training under Obi-Wan, but I completely disagree. There are actually multiple complexities for his character that the Phantom Menace adds, which make his downfall and arc all the more interesting and impactful. For one, showing Anakin as a 9-year-old boy who was brought up as a slave rather than the traditional youngling upbringing of most Jedi explains why he would have a more troubled mindset on things later in life. And it turns out that when Mace Windu said Anakin was too old to train, he was actually right.
He will not be trained. He is too old.
Also, it makes sense that Anakin would struggle more with attachments than most Jedi, considering that while most spend the first 10 years of their lives in the Jedi Temple isolated from their family, Anakin spent his first 10 years with his mother being the only source of comfort in his life. Therefore, he was very attached to her and struggled with letting her and other people go. Another point that is brought up with removing the Phantom Menace is that the Chosen One prophecy is emphasized here, and this is unnecessary and could be cut. Tell me you don't understand Star Wars without telling me you don't understand Star Wars. Well, yes, there are multiple different interpretations of the story as a whole. The big idea with Return of the Jedi, where the series ends, is that Anakin is redeemed by his son and fulfills the Chosen One prophecy by destroying the Sith after having destroyed the Jedi. So this is a crucial, integral part to the overall saga. Also, there are 3 more reasons why the Phantom Menace is important for the overall trilogy, or quadrilogy as we are about to look at. One is that Anakin and Padme don't really get to have a relationship here, which arguably brings that element of the story down, and we also see how they meet and how they have some sort of background with each other, as Padme is Anakin's only real friend after he arrives in Coruscant, so therefore that problem isn't too big of a deal.
What you really got here are 2 characters who are both off on a very difficult journey, both feeling very alone and comforting each other. Padme gets comfort from comforting Anakin.
Next, Qui-Gon is vastly important, as is the Duel of the Fates, because Qui-Gon would have been the perfect master for Anakin, but once he dies and Obi-Wan becomes his master, this dooms Anakin's path even more, and adds another layer of complexity to the story. Lastly, by having the conflict with the new Sith and Trade Federation 10 years prior, this explains the Separatist conflict and Jedi's ignorance to the Sith in the next movies. So while starting with Attack of the Clones would have given more time for Anakin and Padme's relationship and more time to see the Clone Wars, it also would have lessened the impact of the overall story of Anakin and bringing balance to the Force. But here's why Revenge of the Sith should be one movie. Many consider the pacing of Revenge of the Sith to be rushed, with Anakin's turn in particular being an element that should have been slowed down. The suggested solution by some fans to this is to have Anakin become slowly disillusioned with the Jedi Council and to do more and more things that break his morals until he has completely turned evil. Perhaps by performing secret covert missions for Palpatine in the background to get rid of the Emperor's enemies in exchange for teachings on how to save his wife. It is understandable how this could have been made into 2 movies, with Anakin learning under Palpatine and performing missions for him in the first, as Obi-Wan ends the Clone Wars by defeating General Grievous, while in the second, Anakin fully turns to the dark side and helps with Order 66 before his conflict with Obi-Wan leads to the death of his wife and the destruction of his body. While in some ways this becomes a more nuanced story, on the other hand it completely ruins the impact of Anakin's betrayal. By having Anakin as a good person that does an evil thing based on extreme pressure, his own weakness, and flaws from his upbringing, which leads to the destruction of all good in the galaxy and of the Jedi and of his friends, this makes it much more tragic than if he was just an already evil person that continued his path into darkness with the biggest betrayal of his ideals yet. Also, by having Anakin be a good person that does this, it allows us to see how much he regrets his actions once it's too late to turn back on Mustafar, rather than have it not hurt his soul at all. Some people also wanted to see a full movie with Darth Vader in the suit, hunting down Jedi in the early days of the Empire, but this simply isn't necessary for the story of the prequels and even moving into the originals. In the original Revenge of the Sith, we see enough to understand the stories and how they connect. So before I give my pitch for a fourth prequel trilogy movie that solves the problems from only having these three, we need to look at the Clone Wars and how it enhances and improves the overall experience of watching the prequel trilogy movies. By adding the storyline of Ahsoka Tano, Anakin's Padawan, who actually furthers Anakin's maturity and makes him a better person, but is also taken away from him by the actions of the Jedi Council, this leads to even more distrust for them and more anger and resentment for Anakin for losing things he cares about. He's now at this point lost his mother from his own failure, as he believes, and he's lost his Padawan from the flaws of the Jedi Council, and now he has the chance of losing another person who he cares about more than either of them, arguably his wife. And while he knows that wanting more power and going against the Jedi is wrong, he also won't let those weaknesses on his part get in the way of saving his wife. So the Clone Wars gives us multiple seasons to spend with Anakin training Ahsoka to allow us to understand how crushing it would be for him when she leaves, during, and after. Also, we get to see his relationship with his clone troopers, how much of his life the Clone Wars takes up, and the stress it puts on all of the Jedi and characters, and also adds more layers to characters like General Grievous, Darth Maul, and even Yoda. Even more importantly, it has the clones as characters who respect their Jedi generals, which adds another layer of tragedy and betrayal to Order 66. With this said, here's my pitch for the fourth prequel in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, which would, in my opinion, greatly improve the prequels and tie up some elements missing from Attack of the Clones. For me, I believe we should have a movie that takes place in the Clone Wars from start to finish, which could just be called The Clone Wars, but since Star Wars Episode 3 The Clone Wars sounds kind of bad, we could change that to Star Wars A Galaxy Divided, just to show how this war affects the way of life for everyone in the movie, regardless of what side they are on. Now, more on what would take place in this movie in 1 second. And something that works here is by having all of the drama and turning points take place in Revenge of the Sith. This allows for the full weight of that story to be felt at one time, rather than slowly dispersed over multiple movies, and the other two prequels still work perfectly well on their own drama-wise, despite mainly being for setting up the story for Revenge of the Sith to truly work. The Phantom Menace more so than Attack of the Clones, but here's how we could somewhat fix that for Episode 2. So for one, we should fix the dialogue and chemistry of the Anakin and Padme romance in Attack of the Clones to set that up and have it work a little bit better in the new movie as well. Also, for A Galaxy Divided, Anakin and Padme haven't gotten married yet, and this actually doesn't happen until the middle of this movie rather than at the end of Episode 2. In this film, Ahsoka would be introduced to Anakin, trained, and then leave the Jedi Order by the end of the movie. So the film would probably take place over multiple years to allow this to fully transpire. General Grievous would be behind the bombing attacks to create further conflict towards him, and to show that while Anakin might want revenge on Grievous now, it is Darth Sidious who is really orchestrating this all and behind this all. We'd also see multiple Clone Wars battles on different planets, explore the Jedi in their prime, show Anakin and Obi-Wan as brothers, build Anakin and Padme's relationship and then subsequent marriage, and how the war takes a toll on their political views of the Republic, with Anakin siding more with the Chancellor, while Padme is more loyal to democracy. Also, Ventress, Dooku, and General Grievous would all be major villains, and we would explore the backstory of General Grievous and his importance to the war. Finally, we would need to see Anakin as a general and how good he was as a general. We might end the movie on the cliffhanger of Palpatine getting captured by Grievous on Coruscant. But real quick, here's the Christian advice segment of this video. If you want to get back to the main video, skip to this time right here. And today we actually have from Sirach in the Apocrypha, so not the main Old Testament or New Testament, Sirach 49:3, which says, in reference to Josiah, "He kept his heart fixed on the Lord. In lawless times he made godliness prevail." And the reason I thought this was pretty cool, this was from a couple of chapters where they were going over the genealogy of the kingdom of David and all of those things. And I found it very interesting. Not only do I recall from when I was reading the Old Testament how Josiah was sort of a light, a beacon in a great period of darkness where everyone was, turning to idolatry and all of these things rather than keeping the Lord's commandments. But I find this so cool how basically what this is saying is Josiah, in a time when everything was dark and no one was being faithful, he was able to let the godliness prevail. He made godliness prevail through his actions, and I just feel like that's inspiring. We should all inspire to be able to do things like this, even if we're not all on that same sort of journey as Josiah is, which many of us are not. We should still inspire to be making real changes to the world around us in the name of God. Now, a few announcements before we get back to the video. I just wanted to say album of the week is The Melodic Blue by Baby Keem. Consider checking out the merch because I wanted to announce we actually have this sweater line which has a sweater for each of the original 6 Star Wars movies. You can check it out in the description or go to my channel page, go to the store. There's just a little symbol that represents each episode and it's pretty cool. Remember, I upload normal videos every Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also shorts every single day. But yeah, back to the video. But here's what George Lucas said on the structural makeup of the prequels. For one, George Lucas decided on making Anakin younger because a 9-year-old boy leaving his mother would be more traumatic than a 12-year-old leaving his mother. Also, the first 3 are meant as backstory and actually are more character-driven than plot-driven, that being the prequels instead of the originals. Overall, I believe that this explains why George didn't have time to shove in a lot of scenes about the Clone Wars, since he was more focused on the characters than the background plots, and also properly building these character arcs and backstories takes time. So while a 4th movie with Ahsoka training and leaving the Jedi Order would add to Anakin's story, it also makes sense that if we were only doing a standard length trilogy as the goal, that the movies can't really be perfect as far as building every side of the story and characters. And while this would have improved the prequel trilogy greatly, one might argue that the best aspect of the original prequels was in fact Anakin versus Obi-Wan, and if you watch this video right here, you can see why I consider it the best piece of cinema history. But yeah, see ya.